From Austin Film Festival, this is On Story, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. I'm your host, Barbara Morgan. This week on Story, we're joined by a titan of the action genre, Christopher McQuarrie, for a behind-the-scenes deep dive into Top Gun Maverick.
Our whole thing was no one has seen, everybody kept saying, well, everybody's seen Top Gun. And we said, no one's seen it. It doesn't exist. This is Top Gun. This is the movie.
On Story from Austin Film Festival. We'll be back in a moment. Hey, podcast listeners. I'm your host, Barbara Morgan, and you're listening to Austin Film Festival's On Story podcast. This week on Story, Christopher McQuarrie will give us an up-close look at some of the most thrilling moments from Top Gun Maverick. In this long-awaited sequel, Tom Cruise's character, naval aviator Pete Maverick Mitchell, finds himself in the role of teacher for a competitive group of Top Gun graduates. While battling the skepticism of both his superiors and his students, Maverick is tasked with training these young pilots for a specialized mission so dangerous it seems impossible. Maverick's integrity as a leader is tested when he learns that one of his students is the son of his best friend, Nick Bradshaw, a.k.a. Goose, who was killed during a training exercise back when he and Maverick were students at Top Gun Academy. Maverick is forced to confront his past while facing an uncertain future as a pilot who's always one misstep away from being permanently grounded. Christopher McQuarrie worked on Top Gun Maverick as a writer and producer. In addition to Top Gun, McQuarrie has teamed up with Tom Cruise throughout his career, from his work writing and producing the historical thriller Valkyrie in 2008, to writing and directing 4 installments of the Mission Impossible franchise. McQuarrie's illustrious career in the action thriller and sci-fi genres also includes The Way of the Gun, Jack Reacher, Edge of Tomorrow, and The Usual Suspects, which earned him an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. I sat down with Christopher McQuarrie for an in-depth discussion of some select scenes from Top Gun Maverick. But before we ride into the sunset, we recommend you follow On Story wherever you get your podcasts. Sometimes finishing your screenplay can feel like trying to land an F-14 Tomcat with a blown-out engine and an empty gas tank. But armed with a wide range of experience writing across film and television, our amazing guests are here to bring you home. Clips of Top Gun Maverick, courtesy of Paramount Pictures Corporation. I know you were a huge fan, right? I'm sure you, like me, I was standing in my seat in that movie theater. Also really happy to be in a movie theater. And it was a great film to come out of that time period, which we don't need to talk about anymore. So I'd really love to hear I'd love to hear some backstory on it, because I was seeing the trailers before COVID, I thought there were some things out, teasers maybe. And so then everything shifted, and then coming out of it, we get the film. So can you talk a little bit about what the whole process was for that?
Going way back, the earliest conversations, not involving me, about a sequel to Top Gun happened in 1987. When I got involved, the first time I got involved, it was 2011. And Tony Scott was supposed to direct the movie, and I was called into a meeting with Jerry Bruckheimer, Tony Scott, and Tom Cruise. David Ellison held this meeting. David was a big proponent of making a sequel to Top Gun. And I was very, very skeptical of that concept. And I was especially confused as to what I was doing in the room with those 3 guys. They were all reminiscing about making the movie. And as they were talking about story, there was a rough concept for the story, which is a lot of which is in this movie. There's a very basic sketch of the story. And at a certain point in the meeting, I realized the only thing I could provide, as the one person who hadn't worked on the original, I did know what it was to be a 17-year-old kid watching the movie when it first came out. And I said to these guys, it seems to me, as I remember it, and this was during the Cold War, how many people remember the other Cold War? Okay. So in those days, when you went to see movies like The Hunt for Red October and Top Gun and Firefox, all those movies that were coming out during the Cold War, we were bringing that to the movie, the threat of nuclear war and the threat of war with other foreign powers that are never mentioned in the movie, were a very real thing that was very present. In 2011, I said, Maverick was America at that moment, and what America's attitude was at the point in this very heightened time. And unless we can define what America is now, we can't really define who Maverick is. And unless we figure that out, this is all just going to be a cash grab. And the conversation turned being a Hollywood meeting for about 2 minutes to the philosophical nature of what this movie was, and then went right back to plot. And that was kind of the end of it. The meeting was inconclusive. The movie was moving towards production, and then very tragically, Tony passed away, and that was the end of any sequel to Top Gun. The next I heard about Top Gun, I was on the set we were shooting Mission Impossible Fallout in Paris. And then we finished Fallout, and I got called into a meeting, and they had a screenplay for Top Gun Maverick that in no way, shape, or form represents what you see in the finished film. Again, the basic structure was there, but there were a lot of things in terms of character dynamics that weren't working. And most importantly, Maverick was a prop in the movie. He was a reason for the movie to happen. It was not central to him. It wasn't his point of view. And now, Tom Cruise is a very, very specific and exacting filmmaker who does everything in terms of emotion. He's just a giant raw nerve and responds emotionally and can articulate those responses very, very, very readily. And it doesn't matter to what aspect of the film you're talking about. It is not important to Tom Cruise that Tom Cruise be the star of the movie. It's important to Tom Cruise that there be a central character who is the point of view for the narrative at all times. There's one person who's taking you through that narrative. And that really wasn't holding true in this script. So I got called in. A number of writers had been through at that point. Aaron Kruger was in the room, Chad Oman, Jerry Bruckheimer, Tom Cruise. There was a whole bunch of people there. Joe Kosinski as well. And I sat down and started asking questions rather than offering solutions. And Jerry started articulating to me what the movie was about, and a remarkable number of those things were actually not in the screenplay. They were not things I understood from reading the screenplay. And so I pitched what I thought would be the rewrite of this movie, and I had just finished Fallout and really wanted a vacation, wanted to take a break. And Tom Cruise said, I want Chris McQuarrie on this movie until previews. What happened then is a rewrite. And why I want to show you this, I believe that the future belongs to the writer-producer. When they asked me to come here to talk about one of my films, this is the one to which everybody in this room at a Writers' Film Festival can most relate, because I did not direct the film. But I was also applying everything that I had learned as a director. Writing is pushing a boulder up a mountain. Directing is running down the mountain with the boulder chasing after you. And you have no time to learn until it's all over and you look back on it. Whereas when you're acting as a writer-producer, watching a director tear your movie apart and put your movie back together again, I know you're wincing, but I'm going to tell you that's the most important part of the process. The writer-producer, what I'm all about is making yourselves invaluable to the process, making yourself as completely powerful as you can be. And the first thing about that is you are there to help them solve their problems. You're not presenting them with other problems they have to solve. And that's what we as writers are trained to do, is create a script that becomes somebody else's problem. And it took me 20 plus years and a lot of time working with Tom Cruise how to become part of the solution and avoid ever being part of the problem. So when I came on board Top Gun Maverick, having not written the first many drafts of the screenplay, I had no real emotional investment in what existed at the beginning, and that's a very healthy place for you to be. So what I did when I came aboard Top Gun is I sat down with Joe Kosinski and I asked him everything he wanted to be in the movie. And Joe was giving me all of his, it has to be this, and I want this to happen, and much of what you're seeing in the structure were things that needed to be in the movie. And because it was not my screenplay, they were not my rules, they were somebody else's rules. And a big thing that I teach everybody that I'm writing with, there are no rules until you write them. When you start with the blank page, the script is whatever you want it to be. One of the things about Mission Impossible is the first thing they tend to start with is a release date. Mm-hmm. And so you're suddenly given, you have this many months to do this, and then you're going to be prepping. By the time we got to Dead Reckoning, the studio, just after this movie had been completed, said, we want Dead Reckoning for next summer, and we want Final Reckoning for the summer after that. It's not because we're cavalier and we make things up as we go along. It's because we're there to solve their problem. They need a movie for next summer. So here in Top Gun, I had no rules except don't mess up this giant cultural gem of a movie. I have to make a sequel to a movie that is a cultural icon, 35 years of fandom, and whatever we make as the sequel has to be the greatest thing ever made or we're a failure. No pressure. So I just focused on the problem at hand, and that was, okay, here are the things that Joe wants. And that's what brings us to the bar scene, and why the bar scene is the scene I want to talk about. And I have other clips as well. What's really important about the bar scene, it's a deceptively simple scene. You're introducing a bunch of characters over the course of a 12-minute sequence in the movie. That's what it is on paper. It is the most tightly constructed and pre-planned thing, shot for shot, beat for beat, moment for moment in the sequence. And then we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about the music in the bar scene, which is very important. So the bar scene is the introduction of, I think, 12 characters, 2 of whom are not in the scene, 1 of whom is dead, 1 of whom Maverick has had a 30-year relationship with that he never had in the previous movie. And you have to introduce all of these characters, and you have a musical number. And you have flashbacks. And suddenly you start to realize the layers of it are so daunting. And everybody that was looking at this, their instincts, being you're making a big summer tentpole movie, that this sequence was just too dense. People read screenplays, but they don't process them. They're not visually making the movie, and you have to learn how to sort of bring the script to them. Fortunately, when a movie is already going and pre-production is happening, you don't have that hurdle to get over. And that's one of the things that saved this. The other thing that saved Top Gun Maverick was the thing we're not talking about, which is COVID. What happened was Top Gun Maverick finished shooting, and we were really struggling with the edit. It's an incredibly complex movie. There was so much going on, and we had to go make Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. My wife and I were in Venice, Italy. I was 2 days away from shooting Dead Reckoning. We were still in that place of trying to figure out the screenplay because we had a release date. Day 1 of principal photography was 2 days away. The first day of shooting was the scene in Dead Reckoning, for those of you who saw it, where Tom and Ilsa are on the roof deck looking out. They have this kind of sunset romantic scene looking over Venice. And I'm sitting in the lobby of the Gritty Palace Hotel. I'm in the restaurant. And at lunchtime, my wife comes into the restaurant, and I look up and notice no one's having lunch in the restaurant of the Gritty Palace Hotel. And my wife says, that virus that they've been talking about? I said, yes. She goes, it's here. And they're evacuating the city. And this was ground zero for Europe, February of 2020. And they were evacuating the city, and my entire crew was forced to leave Venice 2 days before shooting. I've never been more relieved in my entire life. My wife has a nickname for me. She calls me the Coffin Dodger. And this is why. I went upstairs to Tom Cruise's room. He had not arrived in Venice yet. We called him and said, don't come. And Eddie Hamilton set up his Avid, and we went back to work editing Top Gun Maverick and editing this scene. So I want you to imagine that. I get very emotional thinking about it. I want you to imagine that as you're doing that. It's Eddie Hamilton and I trying to solve this problem, trying to put together all of these pieces.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Pete.
Penny? What are you doing here?
Yeah, I should ask you the same thing.
That's a long story.
I doubt that.
Yeah.
Who'd you off this time?
Another admiral.
Exactly.
Are you mad at me?
Oh, Pete. I can never stay mad at you. That's the problem. I gotta say, North Island's the one place I thought for sure I'd never run into you.
How long you been here?
Bought this place about 3 years ago.
3 years?
Yeah. Not long after you got shipped off to the desert for off that other admiral.
That was 3 years ago?
You must be in a lot of trouble. No way you'd come back here willingly. Well, we'll start it out.
The most critical of the most critical things is, and this is a very important lesson for all of you that took me a long time to learn. If you don't like the protagonist, I don't like you. You put a character in the scene of the movie, no matter how much you want me to like that character, if they don't like the protagonist, I don't like them. We knew that we had a big problem. There was a gulf between Maverick and Rooster, and that the audience was going to be aligned against Rooster because who in the world wouldn't like Maverick? It's going to make me reject that character, which meant that every single person that you're seeing prior to Rooster's arrival is there to create affinity for this group of pilots so that when Rooster walks in, well, if I like them and they like him, he must be okay, and I'm going to give him a chance. That's the principal construction of this scene. Another critical thing is I have to introduce the relationship between Maverick and Penny, a character that does not exist and that in early screenings confused the audience because they were wondering, did I miss something in the first movie? If you go back and watch the original Top Gun Maverick, they mention Penny by name in the first Top Gun Maverick, very much in passing. And everybody thought it would be a lot of fun to bring that character in. And there was a lot more conversation between Jen and Tom around the bar about her father and referencing that scene in the previous movie. All that did was create questions in the audience's mind that they actually didn't need to be asking. We eliminated all of that. The other thing about establishing a character like Penny, in a war movie, if you have a love story, and this guy has to, and I'm invested in the mission that your protagonist is going off on, and the woman with whom he's in love is saying, well, what about me? I don't like that character. That character is outside the movie and does not understand the important stakes of it, and I reject that character. So we had to create how do you create conflict in a relationship where two people are in agreement about everything? That was a very difficult problem to figure out. And ultimately, we then had to figure out Maverick this entire scene has to be from his point of view, but as you notice, he's not in a lot of the scene. There's a lot of things happening in the scene in which he is not involved in the conversation. And all of these were very naughty problems to solve. And we also knew we had this musical number, and Joe Kosinski then started to present me with his rules. The first rule, and one that just became the tentpole for everything, Maverick and Rooster do not interact in this scene. In fact, Rooster doesn't know that Maverick is there because in the next scene, as you will see, in the next scene, Rooster is surprised to find out who their new instructor is. That was very important to Joe. Now, Joe had built this amazing set. Joe's aesthetic sense is extraordinary. Joe Kosinski is an aesthetically stunning filmmaker. And his eye for design, and he comes from architecture. His eye for design is amazing. And he designed this incredible bar, and there were all these concept photos of it, and it was really cool. There was one problem. That oval-shaped bar was built with a piano that was facing inwards, like a piano. It was like a piano bar. And I was describing the scene, having not seen the bar, and saying, okay, well, the piano has got to be in this direction. And Joe said, well, we can't do that. I said, why? And he goes, because the piano is like this. We designed this whole thing. And I suddenly realized Joe has one picture in his mind and I have another. And I said, could we just see an overhead design of the set? And so we brought in a blueprint. You're looking down at the set. And Tom Cruise and Joe Kosinski and I all sat there looking at the set and describing what the environments were, where the characters could be. And we determined that Maverick could only be sitting in one place in the bar. There was no other place that Maverick could be sitting except where you see him sitting. And the camera had to be over his right shoulder. It could not be over his left.
Check it out. More patches.
That's Harvard, Yale, Omaha. That's Fritz.
What the hell kind of mission is this?
That's not the question we should be asking. Everyone here is the best there is. Who the hell are they gonna get to teach us?
It's been declined.
You're kidding.
Hey guys.
How about
That won't cover it.
Again, this is you've created all these layers in here, and this is a scene of your making from the script right after having this conversation with the director. And on the page, what did that actually look like? In the sense of you've layered all these things for the director, hopefully.
Structurally, everything. Now, there's no direction in terms of what the shots are, but the construction of the scene remained unaltered with the exception of the dialogue around Penny and Mav. We kept rewriting that and kept dialing that in. But the construct of the scene as you read it on the page is very much what it was there.
But then you were working with a director to literally through each of these things, right? Each of these moments. There's so many minutia. There's so much
Yes.
minutia in there.
Well, Joe Kosinski is so good and so respectful. And my job, because of taking all the rules and applying all of Joe's rules to the script and understanding this is in service of what you want, I found myself in the rare position of standing next to the director and saying, the script, don't listen to it. Take your headphones off. The line doesn't matter. It's not important. Joe was actually protecting the screenplay, which is a complete 180 from my earlier experiences. I directed The Way of the Gun because I was tired of watching directors mangle the script. And the truth of the matter was they were mangling the script because I didn't know how to write a movie. I knew how to write a screenplay. And when you watch The Way of the Gun, I didn't direct the film, I shot the screenplay. That's a very big difference. It's actually the director's job to challenge the script and to tear it down and to pull it apart. And going through the process of having written, produced, directed, edited, scored, worked in post-production on other people's movies, you suddenly learn the more I give them, the less they can actually change without undermining their own wants and desires. It was just very fortunate that Joe is very clear in his wants and desires. That's very rare. There are not a lot of directors who are actually very clear about it. They're very exploratory, and that's what you run into. That's a whole other net, and it's another panel we'll do on 3 other movies that I've worked on.
But as a producer, your ultimate goal here is a little bit different than the writer's role, right? Which is to protect the entire movie, not just...
Well, the other thing that we had working in this story, was the big thing that was in it was the original Top Gun. There was only so much deviation you can do before it simply wasn't Top Gun. And we were all living in the shadow of that movie. And there were a number of times when people outside of that circle would say, they all were convinced the movie was going to be a hit right from the very, very beginning. And Tom Cruise, and Joe Kosinski, Jerry Bruckheimer, and myself kept saying, no, it's not. It's not. No, the biggest and most important thing, and see, everything's important. The flashback was there because we could not assume that you had seen Top Gun. We're not asking you to leave the movie and remember another movie. Our whole thing was no one has seen, everybody kept saying, well, everybody's seen Top Gun. And we said, no, no one's seen it. It doesn't exist. This is Top Gun. This is the movie. There is no other film. It was 35 years ago. And even if people watched it in the car on the way to the theater, they're not retaining that movie. They're in this reality now. They're not in another reality. And so you had to find a way to infuse Top Gun as in another character, as another ingredient into this movie. And all of that had to be distilled into a sequence that could be no longer than the pages that we had allotted for it and the days in the schedule that we had allotted. And that's what you're seeing here.
Thank you for coming and doing this. You guys got an incredible masterclass.
Thank you, everyone.
On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Kleberg Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story is also brought to you by Bogle Family Vineyards, 6th-generation farmers and 3rd-generation winemakers based in Clarksburg, California. Makers of sustainably grown wines that are a reflection of their family values since 1968. The project is supported in part by the Texas Commission on the Arts. This show is produced by myself, Barbara Morgan, Elizabeth Mims, and Emily Locke. Our associate producer is Freya Neely, and our editor is Rishi Bajekal. Music is by Brian Ramos. Copywriting by Mazzy Smallwood. Production assistance comes from Dennis Moniger, Travis Kennedy Sound, Phil Mazzetti, and KUT 90.5 in Austin. Go to austinfilmfestival.com to learn more about Austin Film Festival and Conference each October. Until next time, I'm Barbara Morgan, and this has been Austin Film Festival's On Story.